Adam Goldberg, An Unauthorized Autobiography. Act 1, Day 1. Actor Adam Goldberg began his memoir in earnest at 1 p.m. in the early spring of 2025 during his daily breakfast of 3 cereals and a cayenne ginger kombucha. He had hoped to get started before the kids and wife got home from the arcade, but he didn't plan his morning well, or at all really, having slept through most of it. He had always known he had at least one good book in him, or a book, or at the very least, he appeared to be the sort of person who might. He settled on a memoir because as he approached his 55th birthday, still reeling from the aftermath of a motorcycle accident, and as friends and colleagues were dropping with alarming frequency, the actor and sometimes filmmaker and musician decided it would be now or it would be never if the world were to ever learn that Denzel Washington had thrown a small piece of fruit at his head. If only he hadn't already tweeted that anecdote 3 times. As Goldberg stared at the ominously titled blank book template in the Pages app on his laptop, the cursor blinking and wait back at him, it dawned on Adam there was just one problem with this resolution. He had nothing to say. But, he said to himself, at least I dread writing. That, Adam decided, was enough work for the day. He had opened the template. Sitting down, after all, was the hardest part, and he had done that. Plus the cacophony of the kids and their incessant pleas to play Monopoly with them, which he hated, but which his father Earl had so patiently played with him when he was a child, and so should he reasoned, gave him an off-ramp. The game, as it turned out, lasted only 20 minutes before Adam stormed off the moment the kids began fighting. It had been enough writing and parenting for one day. Day 2. The next morning, over his meth addict's delight of 3 cereals and kombucha, he cracked back open the laptop. It wasn't so much that he didn't have anything to say. In fact, he had plenty, perhaps too much, and was overwhelmed by the prospect of encapsulating a life in which he himself was showing increasingly less interest, let alone the imaginary audience for whom he was writing. This was all a bit ironic, given that he had always felt more like a character in a story, or a movie, more precisely, than a mindful human with a subjective point of view. If only he could channel this quirk that had afflicted him for so long into something like the novel of his life. Wouldn't he merely need to channel or transcribe it? But that observational perspective had become more diffuse over the years. The dramatic way in which he would move through life's most mundane activities, let alone the legitimately dramatic alcohol and passion-fueled episodes of his younger life, seemed to have dulled with age. In many ways, this was healthy, as it tended to make him more present. Certainly, if he had had kids in his 20s or 30s, like his parents before him, not only would they likely have been much shorter, given his proclivity for tiny women during those years, but they would have had a dad much more focused on the biography he was convinced he was forging with each long drag of his ubiquitous cigarette. Cigarettes allowed Adam to imagine himself some impossible combination of viscerally cool and self-consciously neurotic, a sort of Frankenstein, Woody Allen, James Dean monster that would conquer Hollywood, a city into which he had been born but had always felt like an interloper. He actually looked fairly natural smoking, and it became something like an 11th finger. But it took practice, hundreds of hours of jazz, film noir, and countless drives, until his sensitivity to literally almost anything that could be construed as an allergen was finally supplanted by a bona fide smoking addiction. The cancer-causing fidget sticks allowed him to socialize with as much ease as he was ever able to conjure and to appear cooler than he was, casting him in his biography as much Kerouac as hypochondriac. Above all else, they allowed him to write. In fact, they inspired him to write. The more Goldberg thought about it, shoveling in that morning's triptych of sweet fiber, cursor blinking, had he been inspired at all since he quit smoking just prior to his 40th birthday during a bout of bronchitis in late 2009? Had he stubbed out his future as an artist inasmuch as he may have theoretically extended his life with that last cigarette? His fascination with cigarettes, like so many of his Gen X peers, began in childhood. His mom smoked Merritts, encased seductively in an embossed faux Native American silver cigarette pack holder, and in the mid-1970s there was no dearth of candy cigarettes to be found at the local J Market, down the street from his mom's tennis shop on 3rd and Sweetser in the Beverly Grove neighborhood of Los Angeles where they lived. And when he wasn't smoking those, if it were cold enough outside, he would steal one of his mom's Merritts and take a drag off the unlit cigarette and exhale the steam doing his best Bogart. Or, he wondered, polishing off this morning's booch, cursor pounding, Was it Bogart he was emulating, or the meta-Bogart of Play It Again, Sam, Woody Allen's film about a nebbish whose hallucinatory visions of Humphrey Bogart counsel his attempts to seduce women way out of his league? Was this part of the problem? How? Goldberg mused, now staring into the long distance, east across the Hudson River where he and his family had recently relocated. Does one write about a self who not only lived his life as though he were watching himself live it, but about one which was heavily influenced by those who did the same? Whose life was this anyway? That's it. His first line. His fingers ran across the keyboard. Whose life was this anyway? Better yet, he replaced the blank page title placeholder with Whose life was this anyway? A character acting. Because, of course, he was a character actor as well as a character acting. He was off and running, heart racing, fixed to his seat. Sitting down was the hardest part. He had done that yesterday, and he had done it again today. But today, he had a first line, and he had a title, a theme, a jumping-off point, a way in. Suddenly, his fingers screeched to a halt. He looked sidewise, then out again at the Hudson. Wait a minute. Oh, fuck. He opened Safari, typed in the search bar. Whose life is it anyway? It, as it turned out, was Richard Dreyfuss's in the 1981 drama of the same name. Well, that was enough for today. Anyway, he was having a bathroom attack. On the way, he mumbled, IBS, you not, a memoir. Day 3. This morning, around noon, Adam was enjoying some of his children's blueberry kefir in lieu of milk on his cereals at the kitchen bar, riding shotgun to his wife Roxanne, who was working on her laptop eating actual lunch. She was multitasking matters regarding their house and presumably something related to graphic design and illustration. Adam could spy an adorable illustrated mouse on her screen, holding a baseball bat and what appeared to be their dog Brownie, illustrated with a bird on his head in her signature monochromatic beigey brown, referred to by their friend's 6-year-old daughter as family color, given the couple's proclivity for shades of tan in their house and wardrobe. Adam pushed aside his bowl, cracked open his bottle of Excedrin, and got to work. The first order of business was replacing the title, Whose Life Was It Anyway, back to blank book. This reminded him that he, in fact, had a title for this blank book for quite a while, actually. Ativan for breakfast and other remedies. He had thought for years this was just too clever, both idiomatically, like, OMG, that is just too clever, as well as actually just being too clever by half, or maybe more. He never really had a clear concept for it anyway, other than it maybe opening with his homespun recipe for equanimity, Excedrin and Ativan, which he called a Semitic speedball. Adam had been uncomfortable in his body, as well as his mind, for as long as he could remember. Headache since 9, for which he saw his first therapist. Diagnosed with IBS at 14, first colonoscopy at 19. Incessant sinus infections, constant neck pain, which was finally attributed to degenerative disc disease at C4 and C5, and a general malaise, exhaustion, and discomfort. And recently, he had had a bona fide motorcycle accident to round out his genetic predisposition to this panoply of maladies. To this day, it wasn't clear to him whether his moodiness should be attributed to his pervasive discomfort, or if the pervasive discomfort was exacerbated by whatever was at the root of this moodiness. It was not as if he hadn't explored this. This horse, as it were, had been beaten regularly and often for most of his life. His mother, Donna, after all, was a psychologist, though not until Adam was a teenager, but he himself had begun analysis in 1983 when, just as he was about to turn 13, he became so paralyzed by the fear of vomiting he could barely sit through his classes, through a play, ride in an elevator. He just remembered. He had a dream last night. His dream life had been particularly active lately, and perhaps always. He couldn't quite remember, probably not the best attribute for an author of a memoir, but lately he was keenly aware of how much he had been dreaming, and he attributed his chronic fatigue, at least in part, to the fact that he often felt as if he were living two lives, a waking life and a dreaming life. Might that be a good place to start? That summer in Austin he spent filming his role in Richard Linklater's Waking Life? Well, that would be arbitrary. What would? Roxanne asked. Had he said that out loud? Just beginning this thing with some random cameo I did. He'd have mentioned Waking Life by name, but she was unfamiliar with most of Goldberg's oeuvre, having grown up going to a Waldorf school where they forbade mainstream media. Never mind that the film came out long after she left and was well into her Waldorf Rumspringer by then. Still, her knowledge of pop culture was sporadic and seemed largely forged by illicit evenings spent watching Nick at Night with her grandmother. Is this book about your career or your life? I don't know. Both. I mean, that's what these things are, right? He wondered. Yeah, right, but do you want to focus more on career anecdotes or your, inner life, your feelings? I mean, you have a lot to say about a lot of things. It doesn't have to be just a chronology of events. Yeah, I know. That's the problem. The entry points are endless. I mean, no one is really clamoring for the definitive Adam Goldberg biography. I mean, even Charles Grodin's... Who? She asked. He... Really? Not even him? Roxanne sheepishly shrugged, but she was so beautiful, so sweet, the yin to his raging yang, that his incensed incredulity was quickly dampened. One of the greatest character actors ever. But, I mean, that's not even a fair assessment of his career. He starred in Heartbreak Kid. Remember he marries the Jewish... Nothing. He starred in the Beethoven movies. Oh, yeah, Roxanne celebrated. Anyway, it was called It Would Be So Nice If You Weren't Here, and it was essentially about being almost that guy, or playing second fiddle to that guy. But A, he wrote it already, and it was perfect, and B, for instance, his story about turning down the fucking Graduate. You've seen The Graduate. Roxanne rolled her eyes as she put the finishing touches on some tiny pot she must have thrown between sentences. Yes, I've seen The Graduate. Okay, and B, turning down The Graduate is a little bit more fascinating than, say, me having a scheduling conflict and not being able to play the Jared Leto role in The Panic Room. Roxanne struggled to place the movie. Don't worry, nobody saw it. Oh. Anyway, I'm not even second fiddle anymore. I mean, briefly in the 90s, I was thought of as a kind of ubiquitous second fiddle, but I'm not even sure I'm playing fiddle at all anymore. I mean, if I were a huge star, let's say, and then had a cataclysmic implosion, I mean, sort of like Val did, then that's your story. But a character actor who had a few shots at leads, directed 3 films nobody saw, one of which he himself can't stand, and makes records under a pseudonymous band name is not exactly a pitchable property. Babe, stop it. First of all, you're wonderful. Perfect. Can I quote you on that? It'll be the lead on the back of the book. He's so wonderful. Wife, Roxanne Daner. Roxanne continued. And second of all, you work constantly. You've been on a TV show for the last 5 years. I'm on a reboot of The Equalizer where I basically play a search engine. I mean, would you run to the bookstore or whatever, your Kindle, if you heard the hacker on CSI had written a memoir? Yes, if they had an interesting life and something to say and an engaging way of writing it. Well, 0 out of 3 ain't bad. Stop it. I don't know. Sometimes I wish something really tragic had happened to me. Like, oh my God, I was molested. That's why I am this way. Roxanne rolled her eyes. Adam closed his for a moment, then recalled. I mean, my mom's first boyfriend did show me his uncircumcised penis when I was like 7. Ew. And he used to spank me, or he spanked me once, and my mom swears she didn't know it. I mean, that counts, right? Honey, you don't have to have been molested to have something to say. And with that, Roxanne put her freshly painted, perfectly perfect tiny flower pot on a shelf to dry and set off to do things that no doubt kept the house from collapsing around them. Adam stared back at the screen, and while he appreciated her support, he'd require more than that to commence this ambitious effort. He'd felt for years he required more than that. The self-generated multitudes of self-expression he had birthed into the ether, the nonlinear films, the dreamy analog photography that populated his Instagram, the psychedelic one-man pop he'd orchestrated in his home studios, had never given him the sort of positive feedback his ego required in order to continue the wrenching work of creating stuff. And telling himself that Van Gogh had never sold a painting in his lifetime had ceased to be a source of solace. He was fairly certain that nothing he had made, not the least of which a potential memoir, was going to be his irises. He began to type. Not my irises. This ain't no irises. He stared at these title options, then deleted them. What about the dream? What if he opened with a dream? The dream. What had he dreamt last night? He knew it took place at the house in which he lived with his mother, 6401 Maryland Drive, in the Mid-Wilshire district of Los Angeles, from 1976 to 1984, a place suffused with so many gauzy memories and so much Freudian significance that he visited it on a nearly monthly basis while he slept. He would open with the dream. If only he could remember it. He pumped a third Excedrin and washed it down with an Ativan as he set off to tackle his truncated day. An hour of serving practice at the local court, a protein bar, then to Bud's Little League game where he would park his ass on a metal bleacher for 2+ hours for the third time this week. Between his 10-year-old Bud and his 6-year-old Sonny, a budding ball player in his own right, he had begun to wonder if they should spread his ashes on the Little League field. This has been episode 1 of Adam Goldberg, an autobiography. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the podcast or to the Substack, where you will find these words in their written form as well as ancillary materials. It's free. What do you have to lose? I guess time.